We are going to cover everything that you need to know about the Rune-Keeper class in Lord of the Rings Online. Rune-Keepers are described as master scribes with runes, and they're very heavily inspired by Celebrimbor in Rings of Power. This class is definitely more like a mage or sage type of class with magical abilities, so you can do a good amount of long-range damage. Now this may surprise you, but the class difficulty for Rune-Keeper is labeled under moderate, and I would honestly lean it closer to like basic. I know personally when I was getting back into Lord of the Rings after taking like a 2-year break, I chose to go with the Rune-Keeper because I wanted something that would give me a heal ability, a couple of long-ranged abilities, and not only that, has some massive critical like rating of DPS and all of that. So I very much feel that this is a basic class. I don't really find it too difficult to really learn, but as the game says, it's moderate class, so you have been warned. Rune-Keeper class is very much based off of DPS and healing. What's nice about the Rune-Keeper is that you don't really have to commit to one or the other. You essentially get the best of both worlds. Unlike Minstrels, that is another healing class in Lord of the Rings Online, very kind of similar to Rune-Keeper to an extent, but Minstrels are also really good with heals and can also do DPS. The difference with Minstrels is that they have to commit to a stance before they start attacking, and they cannot switch stances in middle of combat. What I mean by that is essentially as a Minstrel, you would have to commit and think about what stance you wanted to do before you started attacking. They have 3 stances, and I'm going to cover it all in the breakdown video, but you can essentially choose between like a DPS stance or a healer stance. But once you start attacking your enemy, whatever skills you have and whatever stance you chose, you cannot switch until you're done with combat. Rune-Keepers don't have that problem. Rune-Keepers can literally do either or in the middle of combat, and they have this thing called the Attunement panel. The Attunement Bar is probably like the moderate / difficult part of the class, but I swear it's so easy to understand. You essentially have all of your skills laid out, and if you want to, I don't know, have like a really good heal boost and heal others around you, you'll actually just want to hit like your heal ability, and you'll want to just keep clicking on all of your heals that are available to you, which then that Attunement Bar is going to go up every time that you hit a heal, and then the higher up it goes, the more likely you're going to have like better heals and such. So if that makes sense to you guys, it's actually kind of comparable to the fervor portion of champions, which I do cover in the guide that I will have linked down below for you, but it's kind of like that, where you essentially just hit your base skills, and then generally those skills will then give you a little bit of fervor, or in this case like an attunement level, and then from there you could then get better skills unlocked that have higher critical damage and all of that. So that's the most difficult part of the Rune-Keeper, is just keeping an eye on that panel, but more or less it's super easy, and the heals on Rune-Keepers are massive the higher level you get. So even the base heal skills actually help me quite a lot. As I've explained the class role, I will say that this is probably more like a niche class in Lord of the Rings Online. What I kind of mean by that is that there's actually pretty few things that you have access to as a Rune-Keeper. So I'm going to mention, just for starters, what classes can play Rune-Keeper, and then I'm going to talk about the weapons you can wield, and then you'll probably understand what I mean by niche. Regarding races, the races that you can play is a dwarf, elf, a high elf, man or stout axe, Rune-Keepers. As you can tell though, this class is not for hobbits, unfortunately. And yeah, as Bjorning, you just can't be a Rune-Keeper. You can only be Bjornings, just like I've mentioned before. The armor level of this class is only light armor, so you pretty much have no armor abilities, which can be kind of frightening. However, you do have really good like long-range radius of hitting some of your skills. So for me, I actually main a Rune-Keeper right now. I'll also note that I have a short out, which I recommend you check out, but I literally gathered 15 mobs who were like a level beneath me maybe, and legit I took out all 15 with light armor, and it was incredible. There are some really good AoE abilities that your Rune-Keeper can use that are just so good. Now I will specify, I am a yellow line Rune-Keeper. That is like the best line to get into from everyone else I've heard. I will go over the breakdown of the class tiers, but I highly suggest that you check out the yellow tier Rune-Keeper. So let's go over the trait trees because I'm already on it. So you have your blue tier line, which essentially is healing over time. This is really good for raids if you are going to be like a secondary or primary healer. Not necessarily really going to help you in soloing really hardly, but blue lines are great for raiding. The red line is essentially more damage over time, and Rune-Keepers kind of have like two elements, sort of like a lore master in this regard. How lore masters kind of have like the wind, fire, earth abilities. Rune-Keepers have two elements of their own. So red line, it's damage over time, but they actually emphasize using fire damage, which is really cool. I did do red line for a while, and it is good with damage over time, but like I said, with light armor, it can be a little more challenging in that regard, because you do damage over time. You might be able to take out a couple mobs before they even touch you, but if they do touch you, you might have to take a couple of hits, which with light armor, a little more risky. But yellow tier line that I would highly recommend. This is essentially like the lightning element line. This is for more like instant damage. It is so instant. There's more short-ranged abilities though, but that's where the good AoE abilities come in. But like I said, I highly recommend the yellow tier. It's more lightning based. Red tier is also good for soloing. However, that is damage over time, so it might be a little more riskier because it's going to take you a little longer to slaughter some enemies. Now, going into that, I just want to briefly talk about the weapons that you can wield. Guess what? You literally can wield one weapon. One weapon. It's runes. That's it. You don't wield swords, you don't wield spears, daggers, shields, none of that. You don't have anything but your runes. Kind of nice because you don't have to go through too much like armor and sifting through everything all of the time, but kind of limiting because you have essentially a pretty niche down class, so it might be a little more difficult to essentially buy things out of the auction hall because all Rune-Keepers are going to be looking for the same thing. We're all looking for runes all the time. It can be a little more overwhelming in that regards, that you're going to probably have to sort out other different resources in order to get more runes if you need them. On the topic of the trait trees, I'm going to mention some of the most important abilities that you will need as a Rune-Keeper. As a Rune-Keeper, your very most important stat is Will. You love Will. Will is your most important stat. Vitality is your second most important stat. What you'll want to really work on is critical rating and the tactical mastery sections of your stats. Critical rating in particular is so needed, especially if you're going into yellow line in particular, and it definitely will help for yellow line. So definitely get more critical rating where possible. Some of the virtues I would recommend for your Rune-Keeper would honestly be wisdom. Wisdom will be the biggest one that you need. Honesty is the second one. I'm definitely trying to go for wit, loyalty, and confidence as well. Now, based on what virtues you need, and since I've talked about the races, I want to recommend what I would personally go for if you're very much focused on which race you should play for which class. I would highly recommend that you try out High Elf because there is a slight decrease in will. However, High Elves do have a characteristics where they do have a -7 decrease in will. However, that's honestly nothing once you scale up a little bit. That -7 isn't going to scale up with you. Just think of it like you have negative will when you first start, so it can pretty much suck in the beginning. Getting past that, there is an additional racial trait that you can slot as you play the game, and that racial trait will actually start giving you a bonus of will, and it'll scale up with you. Plus, they also have a trait that's going to give you +1 in wisdom, confidence, and justice. But like I said, wisdom is a super important ability for your Rune-Keeper. It's a main virtue that you will need to focus on. It should be the first one you focus on. And what I mean by +1 is that it will give you an additional ranking of that virtue. Last point I just want to mention is that Rune-Keepers do have this thing called a runestone. What I will mention about the runestone is that once you place it down, it can essentially act like the captain's banner, where it will help you to an extent. So then that way it's almost like a passive ability to utilize, which I would highly recommend to do. For yellow line, I placed down my runestone, and it essentially has really good damage that it is like almost like a taunt to an extent. It will aggro enemies to it. I've seen it multiple times, and there's only a couple enemies that might not go around it and start hitting it, but whenever I place that thing down, it gives me a little more time to recover and I definitely would recommend that you highly utilize your runestone while you can. But overall, that's just sort of my tip for Rune-Keepers. For yellow line Rune-Keepers, I would recommend you check out my streams because I have a lot of different combos and abilities I like to utilize, so if you want some ideas, I could definitely give you some, and feel free to ask any questions over there. But that is all for the video today. I hope that I was able to give you a little more of a breakdown for the Rune-Keeper, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. I'm always checking out the comments. And until next time, stay weird, weirdos.